Welcome to Elizabeth's Stories. Today we follow Geraldine Foster, a devoted mother betrayed by her son, who reclaims her dignity, confronts exploitation, and builds a meaningful legacy. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly videos revealing heartfelt truths. Share your thoughts below. Let's start the story. The air inside First Fidelity Bank was thick with the scent of polished wood and artificial lavender, a sterile perfume meant to mask the cold ambition of money. I sat in a leather chair that creaked under my weight, my hands folded in my lap, fingers tracing the familiar ache of old bones. Across from me, behind a desk gleaming like a dark mirror, my son Daniel slid a manila envelope toward me. His hands were smooth, unscarred, the kind that had never known labor or sacrifice. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, avoided mine. "Here," he said, his voice clipped like a man concluding a transaction. $20,000. That's enough. That's all you'll ever get." The words hung between us, heavy as the fog that clung to the city outside. I didn't reach for the envelope. Not yet. I studied him instead. His pressed suit. His polished watch that cost more than my car. His posture that screamed certainty. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd tied up the loose ends of my life with a single check. But he didn't know what I knew. Not yet. The bank manager, Mr. Halbrook, sat behind his monitor, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, pretending to be engrossed in some invisible task. His discomfort was palpable, a faint sweat glistening on his brow. He didn't want to be here witnessing this. Neither did I. But I wasn't here to play the victim. "Daniel," I said, my voice steady, softer than he deserved. "That's very generous of you." He smiled, a tight, satisfied curve of his lips, oblivious to the ice beneath my words. "Now you won't have to worry about anything anymore, Mom. You're all set." He leaned back, crossing his arms as if he'd just solved a puzzle. "I've handled everything streamlined, the estate, consolidated the assets. You've got your little nest egg, and the rest is in good hands now." Good hands. His hands. The words twisted in my chest, sharp as a blade. I smiled back, mirroring his confidence, but mine was rooted in something deeper, something he'd never understand. "Thank you, Daniel," I said, slipping the envelope into my handbag, the same bag he'd mocked years ago for its worn leather and faded stitching. His eyes flickered with approval, as if my compliance was a foregone conclusion. He stood clapping his hands together with a sound that echoed in the quiet room. "All right, then. I've got to get to the office. Mr. Halbrook will walk you through the papers. Sign them, and we're done." He leaned down, his lips brushing my cheek in a kiss so perfunctory it barely registered. "Take care of yourself, Mom." And then he was gone, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, his stride quick and confident, the walk of a man who thought he'd buried me in paperwork and walked away clean. The door closed behind him, and the room seemed to exhale. Mr. Halbrook cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "Mrs. Foster, would you like to go over the documents now?" I took my time, deliberate and unhurried, opening my handbag and slipping on my glasses. The lenses caught the light, casting tiny prisms across the desk. "No, Mr. Halbrook," I said, folding my hands. "I won't be signing anything today." He blinked, his professional mask slipping for a moment. "I beg your pardon?" I said no. I repeated, my voice firm, a quiet thunder. "None of these documents are valid. The powers of attorney were revoked last month. Daniel no longer has access to anything of mine." The air shifted as if the room itself had caught its breath. Mr. Halbrook stared at me, his mouth slightly open like I'd just pulled a card from a deck he didn't know existed. I wasn't aware. "You wouldn't be," I said gently, but there was steel beneath my words. I reached into my bag again, this time pulling out a second envelope, its crisp edges embossed with the letterhead of my lawyer, Marion Evans. Daniel thought he was clever, but I've been alive long enough to know what it means when someone starts handling things without asking. Mr. Halbrook took the envelope with hesitant fingers as if it might burn him. He opened it, his eyes scanning the pages, and I watched the realization dawn. His shoulders stiffened, and he looked up at me stunned. Everything is already transferred to a new trust. That's right, I said, leaning back in the chair, the leather creaking like a warning. Daniel was never meant to be my keeper. He just never realized I stopped being his safety net a long time ago. The words felt like a spell one I'd been weaving in secret for months. I could see it in Hallbrook's eyes, the shift from seeing me as a frail old woman to something else, something unyielding. I stood my knees protesting, but my resolve unshaken. "I'll be taking the envelope my son gave me," I said, gesturing to the manila packet. "I'm sure he'll be needing it soon." Halbrook didn't speak. He handed me the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly, and I tucked it into my bag. I left him there, staring at the papers, his world reordered by a truth he hadn't seen coming. As I stepped out of the office, the fall wind hit my face sharp and cold, like a truth I'd been avoiding for too long. The city bustled around me, cars honking pedestrians weaving through the streets, but I felt something new. Not anger, not revenge. Relief. A quiet, unshakable relief. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to make a choice. And now that it was made, the weight of decades lifted, leaving only the clarity of what came next. The bank's glass doors reflected a woman I barely recognized. My hair, once chestnut brown, was now silver, pulled back in a neat bun. My coat was practical, not flashy, but it was mine, bought with my own money, not Daniel's. I stood on the steps, letting the wind bite at my cheeks, and felt the envelope in my bag like a talisman. $20,000. A final insult disguised as generosity. I could almost laugh at the audacity of it. But there was something else, too, a whisper in the back of my mind, a sensation I couldn't shake. It had started weeks ago in the quiet hours of the night when I'd found the old cedar chest in my bedroom. Inside, buried beneath George's letters and my wedding gloves, was a journal I hadn't touched since his death. Its pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the words were alive, pulsing with a warning I hadn't heeded until now. "Trust your instincts," Geraldine George had written in his last letter to me tucked inside that chest. "They've never led you wrong." And they hadn't. Not when I'd sensed Daniel's growing distance, his visits becoming shorter, his requests for money more frequent. Not when I'd noticed the way he'd started signing documents without showing them to me, claiming it was for my own good. And not when I had found the hidden clause in the estate papers, he'd prepared a clause that would have stripped me of control, relegating me to a small apartment and a monthly allowance, like a child sent to her room. I'd always known something was off, but it wasn't until I opened that journal that the pieces fell into place. The entries were short, fragmented, but they told a story of betrayal I'd been too loyal to see. Daniel asked for another loan today, said it's the last time. I wish I believed him. The words had haunted me, but they'd also awakened me. And then there was the dream, the one that came the night before I revoked Daniel's access. In it, I stood in a vast, empty bank vault, the walls lined with locked boxes. A voice, not George's, but something older, deeper, whispered, "You hold the key." When I woke, my hands were trembling, but my mind was clear. I called Marion the next morning. Now, standing outside the bank, I felt that same clarity, sharp as the autumn air. But there was something else, too. A shadow at the edge of my thoughts, a sense that this wasn't the end of Daniel's game. He'd always been clever, always one step ahead, or so he thought. But cleverness is a fragile thing when it's built on lies. And I had something he didn't time to watch, to plan, to unravel the web he'd spun around me. I walked to my car, an old Buick that groaned like an old friend when I turned the key. The city blurred past me as I drove the envelope heavy in my bag. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it represented, not a gift, but a cage. A cage I had just shattered. Back home, the house greeted me with its familiar scent of lemons and wood polish, a fragrance woven into the walls over decades. It was the house George and I had bought in 1972, a modest two-bedroom, with a yard he'd promised to fix up, but never did. Every corner held a memory, the scuff on the hallway wall from Daniel's tricycle, the loose doorknob he'd yanked in a tantrum at 9. I hung my coat on the iron hook by the door, slightly bent from years of use. George had meant to replace it the week he died. In the living room, sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across the mantel. Photos cluttered the space, George and Daniel on a fishing boat, me and George at our 30th anniversary. Daniel at his college graduation, his eyes already looking past me. I sank into my chair by the window, the one that had molded itself to my shape over years. The springs sighed beneath me, a quiet acknowledgement of time. I opened my handbag and pulled out the envelope Daniel had given me. Its weight felt wrong, too light for the finality it was meant to carry. I set it on the coffee table unopened and stared at it. $20,000. A fraction of what I'd given him over the years. A fraction of what he'd taken without asking. The numbers were burned into my memory. $10,000 for his failed business, $2,400 for the mortgage I'd co-signed, $8,600 for his daughter's tuition. Nearly $1 million gone with nothing but a jar of overpriced jam to show for it. But it wasn't just the money. It was the way he'd stopped seeing me, the way he'd reduced me to a means to an end. I'd been his mother, his confidant, his safety net. And now I was an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved with a check and a signature. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let the memory of the journal surface again. That night, when I'd found it, I'd felt a chill, as if the house itself was whispering to me. The pages were filled with my own handwriting, a record of Daniel's demands and my quiet compliance. But there was something else, too, a single entry written in a hand that wasn't mine. "He's watching you, Geraldine. Be careful." I'd dismissed it as a trick of my tired mind, but now, sitting here, I wasn't so sure. Who had written it, George? A stranger? Or something else entirely? I opened my eyes, the envelope still staring at me from the table. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the paper, and for a moment I swore I felt it pulse like a heartbeat. I froze, my breath catching. The room was silent, but the air felt charged, as if something unseen was waiting. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. It was just paper, just money, just Daniel's last attempt to control me. But as I stood to make tea, the whisper returned, soft and insistent. "You hold the key." I glanced back at the envelope, my heart pounding. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning. The kettle whistled, pulling me back to the present. I poured the tea, the steam curling like a question mark. The house was quiet, but it felt alive, its walls holding secrets I was only beginning to uncover. I sat back in my chair, the envelope still unopened, and let the warmth of the mug ground me. I wasn't the woman Daniel thought I was, not anymore. I was Geraldine Foster, a woman who'd survived loss, betrayal, and the slow erosion of her own worth, and I was done being invisible. Outside, the sky darkened, promising rain. I sipped my tea, my eyes never leaving the envelope. Whatever Daniel had planned, whatever secrets he thought he'd buried, I would find them. I would unravel them. And when I did, he'd learn what I'd known all along. I was never his to control. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, a relic from the year George and I moved in 972. Its hands moved with a relentless rhythm, marking time I'd spent giving, always giving, until I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to keep something for myself. I sat in my chair by the window, the one that had molded itself to my shape over decades, the springs groaning softly beneath me. The envelope from Daniel still lay on the coffee table, unopened its presence like a bruise I couldn't ignore. $20,000. A paltry sum meant to buy my silence, my surrender. But it wasn't the money that stung, it was the realization that my son saw me as nothing more than a ledger to be balanced. I closed my eyes, and the house seemed to breathe with me. The scent of lemons and wood polish filled the air, a fragrance woven into the very walls, a ghost of the life George and I had built. This was our home, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a yard he'd promised to fix but never did. Every corner held a memory sharp and vivid, like photographs I could touch. The scuff on the hallway wall from Daniel's tricycle when he was 5. The loose doorknob he'd yanked in a tantrum at 9, still wobbling after all these years. The iron hook by the door bent from the weight of too many coats, a project George meant to replace the week he died. I opened my eyes and stood my knees protesting with a familiar ache. The living room was bathed in the soft amber glow of late afternoon, the lace curtains filtering sunlight into delicate patterns across the mantel. Photos cluttered the space, George and Daniel on a fishing boat, Daniel's small hands clutching a trout. Me and George at our 30th anniversary grinning like fools. Daniel at his college graduation, his eyes already looking past me toward a future where I didn't fit. That was the last time he hugged me without an agenda, without a request lurking behind his smile. I moved to the secretary desk in the corner, its drawers heavy with the weight of years. My fingers brushed the worn wood, and for a moment I swore I felt a pulse like the house itself was alive, urging me to remember. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a blue folder, its edges frayed the label in my own handwriting. Daniel Expenses. Back when I still made little labels, back when I thought order could keep chaos at bay. I sat back in my chair, the folder open on my lap, and began to read. The pages were a ledger of my love, written in blue ink. Each entry a wound I'd dressed with hope. 10,000 for the business that folded in 18 months. 2,400 for the second mortgage I co-signed and later paid. 8,600 for his daughter's private school tuition. 6,400 for the twins' summer STEM camp. $14,000 for missed scholarship deadlines. 7,500 for a legal retainer when his business partner sued him. The numbers went on page after page, a litany of just this that stretched across years. Nearly $1 million given freely because George had said, "He's our boy. That's what we do." But George was gone now, and it was just me and Daniel's endless needs. I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling, not with anger, but with clarity. Each check I'd written, each transfer I had authorized was a piece of myself I'd handed over, believing it would make him see me, believing it would make him love me. But all it did was make me invisible. I paused at a receipt dated 5 years ago, $18,200 for an emergency roof repair on Daniel's condo. I remembered that day. He'd called me in a panic, his voice tight with urgency. "Mom, it's bad. The roof's leaking and we can't afford to lose the place." I'd wired the money that afternoon, my hands shaking as I signed the transfer. Later, I found out the emergency was a renovation to impress a client, not a necessity. He'd never mentioned it again. No thank you, no repayment. Just silence. I closed the folder, my chest tight. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I stood and walked to the kitchen, needing movement to shake the weight of memory. The linoleum was worn, but clean, the white stove as old as the house itself. I filled the kettle, set it on the burner, and waited for the whistle. But as the water heated, my eyes drifted to the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, visible through the open door. It called to me soft but insistent like a whisper I couldn't ignore. I turned off the burner and walked to the chest, my steps slow, deliberate. The hinges creaked as I lifted the lid, revealing a trove of memories. George's letters from Korea, my wedding gloves yellowed with age, a small box of Matthew's childhood drawings tied with string, and beneath it all, the red leather-bound journal I hadn't touched since George's death. I'd forgotten I kept it, or maybe I'd chosen to forget. My fingers brushed the cover, and a chill ran through me, sharp and unexplainable. The house was warm, but the air around the chest felt different, colder, heavier, as if it held secrets I wasn't ready to face. I carried the journal to the kitchen table and sat the folder still beside me. The first page was dated April 13th, the day after George's funeral. My handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places where tears had fallen. Woke up today, and the house didn't feel like home. Daniel cried at the service yesterday, but I think he was scared more than sad. I don't know how I'm going to do this alone, but I will. I turned the pages, each entry a snapshot of a life I'd tried to hold together. May 7th. Daniel wants to quit his job and start a landscaping company. Asked for $10,000 to cover his end. I said yes. I wish I'd said, give me a plan first. July 29th. Daniel didn't come for George's birthday. Said he forgot. I made his favorite lemon cake anyway and sat on the porch alone. The words grew colder over time, not bitter, but resigned, as if I was recording the weather of my heart. Sunny, rainy, neglected. And then I found it again, the entry that wasn't mine. He's watching you, Geraldine. Be careful. The handwriting was sharp, angular, unlike my careful cursive. I'd seen it the night I rediscovered the journal, but now in the fading light, it seemed to glow faintly, as if the ink itself was alive. My breath caught, and I looked around the room, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows. But the house was empty, the clock still ticking, the envelope still staring at me from the coffee table. I closed the journal, my heart pounding. Who had written it? George. Impossible. He'd been gone for years. Someone else. But who could have touched this journal hidden in a chest only I opened? The chill returned, creeping up my spine, and I swear I heard a faint creak from the hallway like a footstep on the old floorboards. I stood clutching the journal and walked to the door. Nothing. Just the wind outside, rattling the windows. I sat back down, forcing myself to breathe. The journal, the folder, the envelope. They were pieces of a puzzle I hadn't fully solved. But they were also proof of something I'd ignored for too long. Daniel had never seen me as his mother, only as a resource. And I'd let him because I thought love meant saying yes, because I thought sacrifice was the price of being needed. I opened the folder again, flipping to the last page. A single note in my handwriting added weeks ago when I'd first started unraveling Daniel's lies. Total given $894,000. Total returned $0. Total respect shown variable, usually unavailable. I picked up a pen, my hand steady now, and added a new line in red ink, no more. The act felt final, like signing a contract with myself. I closed the folder and stood my knees crackling like dry twigs. The house was quiet again, but it felt different now, not empty, but waiting. I walked to the window and looked out at the darkening street, the oak tree in the yard swaying in the wind. A single red leaf broke free and floated down, sticking to the glass for a moment before slipping away. It felt like a sign, though, of what I couldn't say. I turned back to the table, my eyes falling on the envelope. I hadn't opened it, hadn't wanted to give Daniel the satisfaction of my curiosity. But now something compelled me to pick it up. My fingers brushed the paper, and there it was again, that faint pulse like a heartbeat trapped inside. I froze, my breath shallow. The room was still, but the air felt charged, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I tore open the envelope, half expecting something to leap out. Inside was a stack of crisp bills, 20,000 as promised, and a folded note in Daniel's precise handwriting. I unfolded it, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with anticipation. Mom, this is for your future. I've taken care of everything else. Trust me. The words were simple, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Trust him. After years of lies, of manipulation, of quiet theft, I set the note down and stared at the money. It wasn't just a bribe, it was a message. Daniel thought he could buy my compliance, my silence, my life. But he didn't know what I'd found in the journal, what I'd seen in the numbers, what I'd felt in the air. He didn't know that I was awake now that I was watching him just as closely as he thought he was watching me. I stood and walked to the fireplace, the journal still in my hand. I thought about burning it, about letting the flames consume the pain, the betrayal, the years of blindness. But something stopped me. The journal wasn't just a record of loss. It was a map, a guide to the truth I was only beginning to uncover. I placed it gently on the mantel next to George's old pipe and a photograph of us from 1978, sunburned and laughing on a dock. Some things didn't need to burn. They needed to be seen. I returned to the table and picked up the envelope, slipping the note and the money back inside. I wouldn't spend it. I wouldn't destroy it. I'd keep it a reminder of what Daniel thought I was worth. But more than that, I'd keep it as evidence of a game I was no longer playing. The kettle had gone cold, but I didn't care. I sat back in my chair, the journal, and the folder beside me, and let the quiet hold me. The house was still, but it wasn't silent. It whispered to me soft and steady like a heartbeat I'd forgotten how to hear. You hold the key, Geraldine. And for the first time in years, I believed it. I wasn't the woman Daniel thought I was, not anymore. I was Geraldine Foster, a woman who'd given everything and lost nothing of herself in the end. I was a woman who'd survived, who'd seen through the lies, who'd found strength in the shadows. And as the night settled around in me, I knew this was only the beginning. There were secrets in this house, in that journal, in the very air I breathed. And I would find them, one by one, until the truth was mine. The phone rang, its soft, classic tone, cutting through the stillness of the house like a melody from another life. I set the journal down on the kitchen table, its pages still open to that unsettling entry in unfamiliar handwriting. He's watching you, Geraldine. Be careful. My heart quickened, not from fear, but from a strange anticipation, as if the call itself was part of the puzzle I was beginning to unravel. I crossed the room, the floorboards creaking under my weight, and picked up the receiver, the plastic cool against my palm. Grandma. The voice was warm, familiar, like sunlight breaking through a storm. Matthew, my grandson. Daniel's youngest, only 24, but carrying a kindness that felt older than his years. Everything all right? I smiled, the tension in my shoulders easing. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tying up some things. But your call, it's the best thing I've heard all day. He chuckled a deep, unguarded sound that made the house feel less empty. Want me to stop by tomorrow? I can bring that pie you like. The peach one. My throat tightened, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Matthew was the only one who called just to talk, who visited without a hidden agenda, who saw me not as a means to an end, but as a person. I'd love that I said, my voice catching slightly. You know, Matthew, you're a good boy. You've never asked me for a thing. There was a pause, as if my words had caught him off guard. Well, you've done plenty for us, he said finally, his voice soft. I just wish, Dad. He trailed off, and I could almost see him lanky and earnest, running a hand through his messy hair. Let's not talk about him now, I interrupted gently. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay. Okay. Love you, Grandma. Love you, too. I hung up my hand, lingering on the phone, the warmth of Matthew's voice lingering in the air. The house was quiet again, but it felt different now, less like a cage and more like a sanctuary. I walked back to the table, my eyes falling on the journal and the envelope from Daniel, still unopened, still pulsing with that strange, inexplicable energy. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. It was just my imagination, stirred by the day's events, by the weight of memory and betrayal. But as I turned away, I swore I heard a faint rustle, like paper shifting on its own. I ignored it and moved to the window, peering out at the street. The oak tree swayed in the wind, its branches casting long skeletal shadows across the lawn. Matthew's call had been a spark, a reminder that not everything I'd given had been wasted. Unlike Daniel, who saw me as a ledger to be balanced, Matthew saw me as family, as someone worth knowing. And that was enough to keep me going, to keep me searching for the truth hidden in the shadows of my own home. The next morning, I woke to the scent of rain, the air heavy with the promise of a storm. I brewed a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and set the table for two cups, 2 plates. Even the peach jam I usually saved for Sundays. Matthew was coming, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope, like a candle refusing to go out. I stood by the front window, watching the street, my hands wrapped around a mug. The journal lay on the table behind me, its presence a quiet weight. I'd read it again last night, unable to sleep, searching for answers in those cryptic words. He's watching you. Who was he, Daniel? Someone else? Or was it just a trick of my mind, a manifestation of the guilt and fear I had carried for too long? The house offered no answers, but it listened, its walls holding secrets I was only beginning to uncover. At 8:05, 5 minutes late by his own standards, Matthew's beat-up sedan pulled into the driveway. I smiled, remembering how I used to watch Daniel's car the same way back when his visits were unannounced, back when they still felt like love. Matthew knocked once, then let himself in his lanky frame, filling the doorway. "Morning, Grandma," he said, setting a bakery box on the counter. "You're late," I teased, already pouring coffee. "Don't fire me yet." He grinned, his crooked smile lighting up the room. "I've got a pie to make up for it." He opened the box, revealing a peach crumble from Lucy's bakery. Not the cheap supermarket kind. The scent of sugar and fruit filled the air, and I laughed, a sound that felt foreign but welcome. "You trying to make me cry first thing in the morning?" He laughed too, that deep, warm sound that made him seem older than he was. We sat at the table, the coffee steaming between us, and talked about nothing, how the neighbor's maple was finally turning red, how the heating bill would be brutal this winter, how the porch swing's chain looked suspicious. It was the kind of conversation I hadn't had in years, simple and real, untainted by expectation. But as we ate, the journal on the table seemed to hum its presence, impossible to ignore. Matthew's eyes flickered to it, then back to me, his expression curious but cautious. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward the red leather cover. I hesitated, my fingers brushing the edge of the journal. "Something old," I said. Something I'm still figuring out. He nodded, not pushing, and took a sip of coffee. But the moment lingered heavy with unspoken questions. I looked at him, his coffee-stained shirt, his earnest eyes, and felt a surge of certainty. Matthew was different. He was the one person who hadn't asked for anything, who hadn't turned my love into a transaction. And in that moment, I knew I had to tell him not everything, not yet, but enough to light the path ahead. Matthew, I said, my voice quiet but clear. I want to change my will. He stopped mid-bite, his fork hovering over the pie. Okay, he said carefully, wiping his mouth. You sure I'm sure of a lot of things now, I said, leaning forward. I'm sure I spent too long pretending I wasn't disappointed. I'm sure your father sees me as a line item in his budget. I'm sure I've confused being needed with being loved. But most of all, I'm sure you've earned something he never bothered to ask for my trust. Matthew sat very still, his face unreadable. He didn't smile or frown, just listened, his eyes locked on mine. I continued the words, spilling out like a confession. I'm not leaving you money so you can owe me. I'm doing it so you can be free, so you never have to become someone like your father, a man who calls helping people a burden, who thinks dignity is something he gets to hand out like pocket change. He was quiet for a long time, his hands resting on the table. Then softly he said, I don't want your money, Grandma. I know I smiled, my heart swelling. That's why you deserve it. We talked through the details, though. I kept the conversation light, avoiding the heavier truths for now. I told him about the trust I'd set up with Marion, the protections in place, the clause for charitable donations if he ever changed his mind. He listened with a patience Daniel never had, as if my words mattered more than his own thoughts. It was a small thing, but it felt like everything. As we spoke, I glanced at the journal again, and that strange chill returned, creeping up my spine. I swear I saw the cover shift slightly as if nudged by an unseen hand. I blinked, and it was still, but the feeling lingered like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. Matthew followed my gaze, his brow furrowing. You okay, Grandma? I forced a smile, pushing the unease aside. Just thinking, I said. There's something I want you to have, but not yet. Something to read when the time comes. He tilted his head, curious, but respectful. Like what? A letter, I said, my voice steady. Something to remind you who you are, and who I am. He nodded, not pressing for more, and I felt a rush of gratitude. But as he reached for another slice of pie, I noticed something, a faint mark on his wrist, barely visible under his sleeve. It looked like a symbol, a small, intricate design, like a key with wings. I froze my breath, catching. I had seen that symbol before in the margins of the journal, scrawled in that same unfamiliar handwriting. Matthew. I said, my voice sharper than I intended. What's that on your wrist? He glanced down, tugging his sleeve to cover it. Oh, just a tattoo. Got it a while back. Why, I forced a smile, my mind racing. No reason, just curious. But it wasn't just curiosity. That symbol, it was too precise, too deliberate to be a coincidence. Was it connected to the journal, to the warning? Was Matthew part of this mystery, or was he as unaware as I'd been? I pushed the thought aside, not ready to confront it, not yet. But it lingered a shadow at the edge of my trust. We finished our coffee, and Matthew offered to do the dishes, a small gesture that felt like a gift. As he stood at the sink, the sunlight catching his profile, I saw George in him, not in his features, but in his quiet kindness, his unassuming strength. And I knew whatever secrets this house held, whatever game Daniel was playing, Matthew was my ally, my spark of hope. I stood and walked to the drawer, pulling out a small envelope I'd prepared the night before. It was sealed addressed to Matthew to be opened only after I was gone. I pressed it into his hand, my fingers steady, despite the questions swirling in my mind. Keep this, I said. Read it when the time comes, not before. He looked at the envelope, then at me, his eyes searching mine. I will, he said, slipping it into his pocket with care. But just so you know, I'd still come every Saturday, even if all you left me was the peach jam. I laughed, a sound that felt like release. And in that moment, the house seemed to sigh with me. The journal lay silent on the table, the envelope from Daniel still unopened. But their secrets could wait, for now I had Matthew, and that was enough. I wasn't alone in this unraveling mystery. I had a spark of hope, and I would hold on to it no matter what truths lay ahead. The morning after Matthew's visit, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, as if the fog of decades had lifted, revealing a path I'd always known was there. The journal still sat on the kitchen table, its red leather cover catching the first light of dawn, and the envelope from Daniel lay beside it, unopened. Its faint pulse, a reminder of the game I was no longer playing. I dressed with care, a dark green cardigan slacks that didn't itch, and the brooch George gave me the year Daniel was born. It wasn't for show. It was for me a quiet declaration that I was done waiting for permission to be seen. I drove to Marion Evans's office on Walnut Street, the old Buick, humming loyally despite its age. The city was waking its streets alive with the hum of traffic and the scent of wet pavement from last night's rain. But inside me, there was a stillness, a certainty that anchored every step. The journal's warning, "He's watching you, Geraldine. Be careful," echoed in my mind, and the symbol on Matthew's wrist, a key with wings, lingered like a question I couldn't yet answer. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew this today I would take back what was mine. Marion's office hadn't changed much in the 20 years since George and I first met her, though the carpet was newer, the computers fancier. She greeted me with a nod, her gray blazer crisp, her glasses magnifying her eyes in that perpetually surprised way. But Marion was anything but naive. She saw through people through lies, through the masks they wore to hide their truths. I handed her Daniel's envelope, the one he'd given me at the bank, its edges still sharp, its weight heavier than it should have been. "He thinks he won," I said, my voice steady as I sat across from her. "He thinks this is the end." Marion didn't open the envelope. She set it on her desk, her eyes meeting mine. "And he doesn't know you've already revoked his access to the estate." "Not a clue," I said, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "I went through Richard Bales at First Fidelity last month. All authorizations were pulled. Daniel's name is off everything. I made sure of that before I even told him I was going to the bank." Marion's lips curved into a soft smile, the kind that said she'd known I'd come to this moment all along. "You should have done it years ago," she said, not unkindly. I know I admitted my fingers tracing the edge of her desk, but I wasn't ready. I felt guilty. She didn't comment, and that was her strength. Silence that made space for truth. I leaned back the chair, creaking softly, and let the words spill out. "He's my son, Marion." I wanted to believe that if I just helped enough, gave him the chance, the start, the support, he'd see me as more than a bank account with a pulse. Marion nodded, her pen poised over a yellow legal pad. "And now I see him for what he is." I said, my voice steady but heavy with the weight of years. "A man who thinks love is a transaction, who thinks my life is his to manage." She scribbled something, then looked up. "Do you still want to proceed with transferring full ownership of your estate into the new trust?" I nodded, my resolve unshaken. "Yes. And the primary beneficiary is Matthew, my grandson. He's the only one who visits because he wants to, not because he's angling for something. The only one who's ever said thank you without a string attached." Marian's pen moved again, her expression neutral, but her eyes warm. And Daniel. Not a cent, I said, and the words felt like a door closing not with anger, but with finality. I'm not angry, Marian. I'm just done. I have nothing left to explain to him. He decided who I was years ago, and now he can live with it. She leaned back, satisfied, and began explaining the documents in plain language, the structure of the irrevocable trust, the healthcare directives, the will, revisions. I listened carefully, my eyes scanning each page as she slid them across the desk. The trust was airtight, designed to protect my assets from anyone who might try to challenge it. Daniel's name was nowhere to be found, and for the first time, that absence felt like freedom. But as we worked, that strange chill returned creeping up my spine like a warning. I glanced at the envelope on Marian's desk, and for a moment I swore I saw it shift as if nudged by an unseen hand. I blinked, and it was still, but the feeling lingered, a whisper of something I couldn't name. Marian didn't notice her focus on the papers, but I felt it, the house, the journal, the envelope. They were all part of something larger, something I was only beginning to understand. Geraldine Marian's voice pulled me back. Are you ready to sign? I nodded, picking up the pen. My hands were steadier than I expected, each stroke of ink a declaration of my own worth. I signed where needed, initialed where asked, my movements deliberate, unhurried. With each signature, I felt the weight of years lift, replaced by a strength I'd forgotten I had. When we finished, Marian notarized the documents, her stamp a quiet thunder in the room. It's all in motion, she said, stacking the papers neatly. Once Matthew signs his part, we'll finalize the filing. If anything happens to you, your assets are protected. Daniel has no legal claim, not unless you change your mind. I won't. I said, my voice firm. Not now, not ever. Marian studied me, a rare softness in her eyes. You know, Geraldine, you're not like most women who come in here late in life. Some are still waiting for permission. You're not. I smiled, a real smile, not the one I'd worn for Daniel's sake. I stopped waiting. That's all. You'd be amazed how clear things become when you realize no one's coming to save you, and you don't need them to. She reached into a drawer and handed me a small envelope, its paper thick and creamy. I took the liberty of printing your letter to Matthew on cotton paper. It'll keep longer. This copy is sealed and filed with the estate, but this one, she tapped the envelope, is yours to give now or keep. I took it, my fingers brushing the smooth surface, and thanked her. As I stood to leave, I paused, my eyes drawn to the vase of lilies on her secretary's desk. George had hated lilies, said they smelled like funerals. The scent hit me now, sharp and cloying, and for a moment I felt that chill again, stronger this time, like a hand on my shoulder. I turned, half expecting to see someone behind me, but the room was empty, the air still. Outside, the October wind bit through my coat, but it felt good, bracing, honest. I stood on the sidewalk, letting the cold remind me I was still here, still standing. Daniel thought he'd buried me in paperwork, tucked me away in a life I hadn't chosen. But I wasn't buried. Not yet. I was the woman who'd run a household on one income, nursed George through 2 surgeries, saved every receipt, read every contract, paid every bill on time, even when it meant going without. I was still her, and she had finally had enough. Back home, I placed the envelope with Matthew's letter on the nightstand next to the one from George I'd found in the cedar chest. My Geraldine, he'd written, "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." His words had carried me through the meeting with Marian, through the signing of the trust, but they also carried a warning one that echoed the journal's cryptic message. He's watching you. I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was still out there plotting his cleverness a shadow I hadn't fully escaped. I walked to the living room, the journal and Daniel's envelope still on the table. I hadn't touched them since yesterday, but now in the quiet of the afternoon, they seemed to call to me. I sat and opened the journal again, flipping to that strange entry. "He's watching you, Geraldine. Be careful." The handwriting was sharp, almost urgent, and in the margin there it was again the symbol I'd seen on Matthew's wrist, a key with wings etched in faint ink. My heart skipped, and I looked around the house, suddenly too quiet, the air too heavy. I closed the journal and reached for Daniel's envelope, my fingers hesitating. The pulse was there again, faint but undeniable, like a heartbeat trapped in paper. I tore it open, the bills spilling out, and found the note inside. "Mom, this is for your future. I've taken care of everything else. Trust me." But beneath the note, tucked into the fold, was something else. A small, folded slip of paper, its edges yellowed, as if it had been hidden for years. I unfolded it, my hands trembling, and found a single line in that same unfamiliar handwriting. "The key is in the chest." I froze, my breath shallow. The cedar chest, the one where I'd found George's letter, the journal, the memories I had buried. Was this a trick? A message from Daniel meant to unsettle me? Or something else? Something older tied to the house, to George, to the secrets I was only beginning to uncover. I stood the slip of paper clutched in my hand and walked to the bedroom. The chest sat at the foot of my bed, its wood dark and worn, its presence heavier than ever. I knelt my knees protesting and lifted the lid. The scent of cedar and thyme washed over me, and I sifted through the contents, letters, gloves, Matthew's drawings. But at the bottom, beneath a faded quilt, I found something I hadn't noticed. Before a small, locked box, no bigger than a book, its surface etched with that same key with wings symbol. My heart pounded, and I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cold metal. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been. And when I lifted it, I swear I heard a faint hum, like a whisper from the house itself. I set the box on the bed, my mind racing. I didn't have a key, but I didn't need one, not yet. The journal, the symbol, the note, they were all connected pieces of a puzzle I was meant to solve. Daniel had underestimated me, thought he could control me with a check and a smile, but he didn't know what I was capable of, what I was becoming. I returned to the living room, the box still unopened, and sat in my chair. The house was quiet, but it felt alive, its walls watching, waiting. I looked at the envelope, the journal, the slip of paper, and felt a surge of strength. I wasn't just reclaiming my estate, I was reclaiming myself, my story, my truth. And whatever secrets lay in that box, whatever game Daniel was playing, I would face them on my terms. The afternoon sun spilled through the window, warm and amber, and I let it wash over me. I wasn't afraid, not anymore. I was Geraldine Foster, a woman who'd given everything and lost nothing of herself. I was a woman who held the key not just to a box, but to her own life. And as the light faded, I knew I was ready for what came next. The house was still as I sat at the kitchen table, the afternoon light fading into a soft gray that draped the room like a veil. The journal lay open before me, its red leather cover worn but warm under my fingers as if it held a pulse of its own. Beside it was the blue folder labeled Daniel Expenses, a ledger of my love and loss, and the locked box from the cedar chest, its key with wings symbol etched into the metal like a silent challenge. The slip of paper I'd found in Daniel's envelope. The key is in the chest, sat next to it, its yellowed edges curling slightly as if it had been waiting years to be found. I hadn't opened the box yet, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't ready. Some truths need time to breathe. I leaned back in my chair, the springs creaking like an old friend, and let my gaze drift to the window. The oak tree outside swayed in the wind, its branches casting long skeletal shadows across the lawn. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the house itself was watching, waiting for me to unravel the secrets it had kept for so long. I'd spent decades in this house, raising Daniel, loving George, building a life stitch by stitch, only to watch it fray under the weight of my son's indifference. But today, I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to understand. I opened the blue folder first, its pages. A map of my sacrifices. The entries were meticulous, written in my careful cursive. Each one a moment I'd given away a piece of myself. $10,000 for Daniel's failed landscaping business in 1998. $20. $400 for the second mortgage I co-signed in 2004, which I ended up paying when he defaulted. $8, $600 for his daughter's private school tuition in 2010. $14,000 for missed scholarship deadlines for the twins. $7,500 for a legal retainer when his business partner sued him. The numbers stretched across years, a litany of just this once, that added up to $894,000, nearly $1 million given freely because I thought it would make him see me make him stay. I flipped through the pages, my fingers lingering on each receipt, each note. A memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden, the day Daniel called about the roof repair, his voice frantic over the phone. "Mom, it's an emergency. The condo's leaking and we could lose everything." I'd wired $18,200 that afternoon, my hands shaking as I signed the transfer thinking I was saving him. Months later, I learned it wasn't a leak. It was a renovation to impress a client, a lie wrapped in urgency. He never mentioned it again, never thanked me, just moved on to the next request. I closed the folder, my chest tight with a familiar ache, but it wasn't the same as before. This wasn't grief. It was clarity. Each dollar I'd given was a piece of my heart offered, in the hope that it would buy his love, his respect. But all it did was make me invisible, a shadow in his life, useful only when he needed something. I picked up a pen, my hand steady, and opened the folder to the last page. In red ink, I wrote no more. I am not invisible. The words felt like a vow, a line drawn in the sand between the woman I'd been and the woman I was becoming. I set the folder aside and reached for the journal, its weight heavier than it should have been. The pages were yellowed. The ink faded in places, but the words were alive, pulsing with the story of my heart. I flipped to the first entry dated the day after George's funeral. Woke up today, and the house didn't feel like home. Daniel cried at the service yesterday, but I think he was scared more than sad. I don't know how I'm going to do this alone, but I will. The words were raw, unguarded, a snapshot of a woman trying to hold her world together. I turned the pages, each entry a step further into the past. May 7th. Daniel wants to quit his job and start a landscaping company, asked for $10,000 to cover his end. I said yes. I wish I'd said, give me a plan first. July 29th. Daniel didn't come for George's birthday, said he forgot. I made his favorite lemon cake anyway and sat on the porch alone. The entries grew colder over time, not with anger, but with resignation, as if I'd been watching myself fade. Sunny, rainy, neglected. And then I found it again, the entry that wasn't mine. "He's watching you, Geraldine. Be careful." The handwriting was sharp, angular, unlike my careful cursive, and in the margin the key with wing symbols stared back at me, its lines precise, almost glowing in the dim light. My heart skipped, and I looked around, half expecting the shadows to move. The house was silent, but it felt alive, its walls whispering secrets I couldn't yet hear. Who had written this George impossible? He'd been gone for years. Daniel. No, it wasn't his style to leave cryptic warnings. Someone else, then. Or something else. I turned the page, and there it was again, another entry in that unfamiliar hand. One I hadn't noticed before. The truth is in the numbers. Look closer. My breath caught, and I glanced at the blue folder, its edges worn from years of handling. The numbers. The $894,000 I'd given Daniel. Was there more to it than I'd realized? I opened the folder again, my hands trembling, and began cross-checking the dates against the journal entries. Most matched dates of loans, transfers, moments of quiet betrayal, but one stood out, a transfer of $50,000 in 2015 labeled investment contribution. I didn't remember authorizing it, didn't remember Daniel asking for it. But there it was in my own handwriting, or what looked like it. I leaned closer, my glasses slipping down my nose. The signature on the receipt was mine, but it wasn't. There was a slight tremor in the pen stroke, a hesitation I never used, forged. The word hit me like a slap, and I felt that chill again, sharp and unyielding. Daniel hadn't just taken what I'd given, he'd taken what I hadn't. I flipped through the journal, searching for a corresponding date, and found it October 15th, 2015. Daniel came by today. Said he needed to borrow my checkbook for an emergency. I was tired, didn't ask questions. I shouldn't have trusted him. I sat back, my heart pounding. The house seemed to hum, the air charged with a presence I couldn't name. I looked at the locked box on the table, its key with wings symbol gleaming faintly as if it knew I was close to something. I stood, my knees crackling, and walked to the cedar chest again, compelled by a need I couldn't explain. I knelt and sifted through its contents, my fingers brushing past George's letters, my wedding gloves, Matthew's drawings, and then I found it, a small velvet pouch tucked into a corner, its weight heavier than it should have been. I opened it, and a key fell into my palm, its surface, etched with the same key with wings symbol. My breath caught, and the room seemed to shift, the shadows lengthening. I carried the key to the table and sat, my hands trembling as I fitted it into the lock on the box. It turned with a soft click, and the lid sprang open, revealing a single item, a folded letter, its paper thick and yellowed, sealed with a wax stamp bearing the same symbol. I broke the seal, my heart racing, and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was George's unmistakable, despite the years. My Geraldine, it began. If you're reading this, you've found the truth. I couldn't tell you in life. Daniel is not what he seems. He's been guided by something or someone else. The key is yours now. Protect it. Protect yourself. The letter went on, cryptic and urgent warning of a shadow that had watched our family, a force that had influenced Daniel's greed, his betrayal. It spoke of a legacy I didn't understand, tied to the house, to the symbol, to a truth I was only beginning to uncover. I set the letter down, my mind reeling. George had known something about Daniel, about the house, about this symbol that kept appearing. Was it real, or was I losing myself to grief, to imagination? I looked at the journal, the folder, the box, and felt the weight of years shift. I wasn't just fighting Daniel's betrayal. I was fighting something larger, something hidden in the shadows of my own home. I stood and walked to the fireplace, the letter in my hand. I thought about burning it, about letting the flames consume the fear, the uncertainty. But I didn't. I couldn't. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Matthew, about the legacy I had chosen for him, about the truth I owed him. I placed the letter back in the box, locked it, and hid the key in the velvet pouch. I wouldn't tell Matthew yet, not until I understood what I was protecting him from. I returned to the table and picked up the journal, flipping to a blank page. I took the pen, my hand steady now, and wrote, "I am awake. I am not invisible, and I will find the truth." The words felt like a spell, a promise to myself and to George, whose voice still lingered in the house, in the letter in my heart. The room was quiet now, the air soft and warm as if the house itself approved. I looked at the folder, the journal, the box, and felt a surge of strength. I wasn't the woman Daniel thought I was, not anymore. I was Geraldine Foster, a woman who'd given everything and lost nothing of herself. I was a woman who'd survived betrayal, who'd found a key to more than just a box. And as the evening settled around me, I knew I was ready for what came next. I stood and walked to the window, the oak tree still swaying outside its branches, whispering in the wind. The house was alive, its secrets waiting to be uncovered, and I was no longer afraid. I was awake, and I would face the truth, whatever it was, with the strength I'd always carried, even when I didn't know it. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves as I drove toward Greenview Senior Center. The locked box from the cedar chest sat on the passenger seat, its key with wings symbol catching the sunlight, a silent reminder of the secrets I hadn't yet unraveled. George's letter found inside that box still echoed in my mind. Daniel is not what he seems. He's been guided by something or someone else. The key is yours and now. Protect it. I didn't know what it meant, not fully, but I felt its weight, a truth tethered to the house, to my family, to them. Today, though, wasn't about solving mysteries. Today was about building something lasting, something Daniel couldn't touch. I parked outside Greenview, a low brick building that looked more like a forgotten library than a place for people to live. The paint was peeling, the windows cloudy with age, but it was the kind of place that held stories in its cracks. Stories of lives like mine, of people who'd given everything and been left to fade. I'd almost ended up here if Daniel had his way. He'd mentioned it once, casually, as if moving me into a home was a favor, not a sentence. The thought still stung, but it also fueled me. I wasn't here to dwell on his betrayal. I was here to create a legacy, one that would carry George's name and my resolve. I stepped out of the Buick, the locked box in my handbag, its presence a quiet anchor. The wind tugged at my scarf, and for a moment I swore I felt a presence behind me, like a hand brushing my shoulder. I turned, but the parking lot was empty, the only sound the rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. I shook my head, dismissing the unease. The journal's warnings, the symbol, the letter, they were making me jumpy, seeing shadows where there were none. But as I walked toward the entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house, the box, the key, they were all watching, waiting for me to act. Inside the reception area smelled of antiseptic and old carpet, a stark contrast to the warmth of my own home. The director, Ms. Clara Hensley, greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was younger than I had expected, mid-40s, with a practical bob and a clipboard that seemed permanently attached to her hand. "Mrs. Foster," she said, shaking my hand, "I can't tell you how grateful we are for your interest." "It's not just interest," I said, my voice steady. "It's a commitment. I want to fund a full renovation of the East Wing, new rooms, better lighting, a garden if there's space. And I want it named after my husband, George Foster." Her eyebrows lifted and she scribbled something on her clipboard. "That's generous. Very generous. May I ask what prompted this?" I hesitated, my fingers tightening around my handbag. How could I explain it? That this was my way of reclaiming what Daniel had tried to take. That I wanted to honor George, who'd loved this community as much as I did. that I'd seen too many people like the woman I'd noticed in the lobby. A frail figure in a faded shawl staring out the window as if waiting for someone who'd never come forgotten by those they'd loved. It's for people who deserve better, I said finally. People who've given everything and been left behind. Clara nodded, her expression softening. I understand. Let's walk through the wing and I'll show you what we're working with. We moved through the center past residents playing cards or napping in armchairs, their faces etched with stories I'd never know. The East Wing was worse than I'd imagined, dim hallways, cracked linoleum windows that rattled in their frames. But I saw potential, a chance to make it a place of warmth, not just survival. Clara outlined the costs, the timeline, the permits, and I listened, my mind already picturing a garden where people could sit, a library with books that weren't falling apart, rooms that felt like home. As we walked, I felt that chill again, sharp and sudden, like a breath on my neck. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, but the hallway was empty. Clara didn't notice her focus on her clipboard, but I felt it, the same presence I'd sensed at home in the bank in Marion's office. Was it George watching over me? Or something else tied to the key, the symbol, the warning in the journal? I pushed the thought aside, focusing on Clara's voice, but it lingered, a shadow at the edge of my mind. Back in her office, we finalized the details. I pledged $200,000 from my estate, a sum that made Clara's eyes widen but felt right to me. It was money Daniel would have taken, money he'd have squandered on another failed venture or a flashy car. Instead, it would build something real, something that would outlast us all. The George Foster Wing, I said, signing the agreement. That's what it'll be called. Clara smiled, a real smile this time. It's a beautiful legacy, Mrs. Foster. We'll make sure it's done right. I left the center feeling lighter, as if I'd shed another layer of Daniel's betrayal. But as I stepped into the parking lot, the locked box in my handbag seemed to hum, its weight heavier than before. I paused by the Buick, my fingers brushing the bag, and felt that pulse again, faint but undeniable. What was in that box beyond George's letter? What truth was I meant to protect? I didn't know, but I was certain of one thing. I wouldn't open it until I was ready, until I understood the shadow George had warned me about. That evening, Matthews came by his sedan, rattling into the driveway just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I'd called him after leaving Greenview, asking him to come for dinner to talk about the trust and the future. The house smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, a meal I'd made more for comfort than necessity. Matthew stepped inside his lanky frame, filling the doorway, a bottle of sparkling cider in his hand. Thought we could celebrate, he said, grinning. You sounded different on the phone, like something big happened. I smiled, setting plates on the table. Something big did happen. Sit and I'll tell you. We ate slowly, the conversation easy. At first, his job at the community center, the new art class he was teaching, the way the kids there reminded him of himself at their age. But as the meal wound down, I felt the weight of the moment settle over me. I cleared the plates and sat across from him, the locked box on the counter behind me, its presence a quiet hum in the room. Matthew. I began, my voice steady but soft. I went to Greenview today. I'm funding a renovation of the East Wing. It'll be named after your grandfather. His fork paused, his eyes meeting mine. Wow. That's amazing, Grandma. Grandpa would have loved that. He would have, I said, my throat tightening. But it's not just about him. It's about making sure people like me, people who've given everything, aren't forgotten. I almost was, you know. Your father thought a check and a nursing home would be enough to tie up my life. Matthew's face darkened, his jaw tightening. Dad's. I don't know what's wrong with him. I've tried talking to him, but he doesn't listen. Not to me, not to anyone. I know, I said, reaching for his hand. And that's why I'm telling you this. I've changed my will, Matthew. The trust is set up, and you're the primary beneficiary. Not because I want you to feel indebted, but because I trust you to understand what it means. Money isn't just money. It's time, it's choices, it's the life George and I built. I want you to use it wisely, not like your father. He looked down at our hands, his fingers warm against mine. I don't know what to say, Grandma. I don't want your money. I just want you. I smiled, my heart swelling. I know. That's why it's yours. I stood and retrieved the envelope from the nightstand, the one Marion had printed on cotton paper. It was sealed, addressed to Matthew to be opened after I was gone. I handed it to him, my hands steady. This is for later, I said. It's a letter like the one your grandfather wrote to me. It'll tell you who I was, who I am. Promise me you'll wait. He took it, his eyes searching mine. I promise, he said, slipping it into his pocket. But as he did, his sleeve rode up, revealing that tattoo, again, the key with wings etched into his wrist. My breath caught, and I felt that chill, again sharp and unyielding. The symbol in the journal on the box in George's letter, it was everywhere, and now it was on Matthew. Was he part of this mystery, or was he as unaware as I'd been? Matthew, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. That tattoo. Where did you get it? He glanced at his wrist, tugging his sleeve down. Just a design I liked. Got it in college. Why? I forced a smile. My mind racing. It's familiar. That's all. But it wasn't all. The symbol was a thread weaving through the journal, the box, the letter. And now, Matthew. Was it a warning, a guide, or something darker tied to the shadow George had mentioned? I didn't know, but I wouldn't ask Matthew, not yet. He was my spark of hope, and I wouldn't let suspicion dim that light. We finished dinner, and Matthew helped with the dishes, his laughter filling the house like music. As he left, promising to return next weekend, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. The house was quiet again, but it felt alive, its walls holding not just secrets, but strength. I sat at the table, the locked box before me, and traced the key with wings symbol with my finger. Whatever truth it held, I would find it. Not for Daniel, not even for George, but for me and for Matthew, who deserved a legacy free of shadows. The night settled around me soft and warm, and I let it hold me. I was Geraldine Foster, a woman who'd given everything and found herself in the giving. I was a woman who'd faced betrayal and emerged stronger, who'd built a legacy that would outlast the lies. And as the stars appeared outside, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. The knock came just as the evening settled into a soft purple haze, the kind of twilight that made the world feel both infinite and intimate. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the locked box, with its key with wings symbol before me. George's letter tucked safely inside, its words still burning in my mind. Daniel is not what he seems. He's been guided by something or someone else. The journal lay open to the cryptic warning, "He's watching you, Geraldine. Be careful." And the blue folder, heavy with the weight of my sacrifices, sat beside it. I'd spent the day preparing not for battle, but for clarity. For the moment, I'd stop pretending Daniel's actions were anything less than what they were. The knock was sharp, impatient, unmistakably his. I stood smoothing my cardigan and walked to the door, my steps steady despite the flutter in my chest. The house was quiet, but it felt alive, its walls holding their breath as if they too were waiting for this moment. I opened the door, and there he was, Daniel, my son, his suit as crisp as ever, his eyes shadowed with something that wasn't quite guilt, but close enough to mimic it. Mom, he said, his voice softer than I'd expected, almost conciliatory. Can we talk? I stepped aside, letting him in, my hand lingering on the doorknob. Of course, I said, my tone calm but unyielding. But don't expect coffee. He flinched just a flicker, but it was there. He followed me to the living room, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood, a sound that echoed the confidence he'd worn at the bank. But tonight, something was different, a crack in his armor, a hesitation in his stride. He carried a small paper bag, the kind from a high-end cafe, and set it on the coffee table. I brought you something, he said, gesturing to it. A peace offering. I didn't touch it. I sat in my chair, the one that had molded to my shape over decades, and folded my hands. A peace offering implies there's a war, Daniel. I'm not fighting you. I'm just done. He sat across from me, his posture stiff, his hands clasped as if to keep them still. Done. He repeated, his voice low, testing the word. What does that mean? Mom, you're upset about the bank. I get it. I should have explained better. The 20,000 it was to simplify things, to make sure you're taken care of. I laughed, a sharp, quiet sound that made him flinch again. Taken care of, I said, leaning forward. Is that what you call it? A check to buy my silence, to make me go away quietly so you can keep what's left of my life. His jaw tightened, but his eyes didn't meet mine. That's not what it was. I was trying to protect you. The estate, the investments, it's complicated. You don't need that stress. Don't I said, my voice steady, cutting through his excuses like a blade. Because I've been handling complicated things my whole life, Daniel. I paid the mortgage when your father was sick. I balanced the books when we had nothing. I read every contract, signed every check, and still had dinner on the table. Don't tell me what I can handle. He shifted his hands, unclasping his fingers, tapping against his knee. I didn't mean it like that. I thought I was doing what was best. For who I asked, my eyes locked on his. For me or for you? The question hung between us, heavy as the air before a storm. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his confidence faltering. I stood walking to the table where the journal, the folder, and the locked box waited. I picked up the blue folder, its weight familiar, and turned back to him. Do you know what's in here, Daniel? Every dollar I gave you, every just this once you promised. $894,000. That's what I gave you, thinking it would make you see me, but all it did was make me invisible. He stared at the folder, his face pale, his hands still. Mom, I'm not finished. I said, my voice firm, but not cruel. I found a transfer I didn't authorize. $50,000 in 2015, labeled investment contribution. My signature, but not my hand. You forged it, Daniel. You took what wasn't yours. His eyes widened, just for a moment, but he recovered quickly, his mask slipping back into place. That's a misunderstanding, he said, his voice smooth, now practiced. I was managing the account. You were tired. You weren't thinking clearly. I did it to help you. Help me, I said, setting the folder down. You helped yourself to my life, Daniel. You stopped seeing me as your mother years ago. I was a bank, a safety net, a problem to be managed. But I'm not a problem anymore. I'm awake now. He stood. His hands clenched, his voice rising. Awake? What does that even mean? You think I'm the bad guy here. I've been trying to keep this family together, to make sure you're not left with nothing. You're acting like I'm some kind of monster. I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving his. Not a monster, I said softly. Just a man who forgot what love looks like, who thinks it's a transaction, a balance sheet. I gave you everything, Daniel, and you gave me a check and a lie. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his shoulders sagging. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes, guilt maybe, or shame, or the ghost of the boy who'd once run to me with scraped knees. But it was fleeting, replaced by defiance. Fine, he said, his voice hard. If that's how you feel, I'll go. But don't expect me to come crawling back when you realize you need me. I don't, I said. And the words were a release, a door closing on decades of hope. I never did. He grabbed the paper bag from the table, his movements sharp, and thrust it toward me. Take it, he said. It's just coffee. You don't have to make it a whole thing. I took it not because I wanted it, but because I wanted him gone. He turned and walked to the door, his steps quick, his anger a tangible weight. As he opened it, he paused, looking back. You're making a mistake, he said. You'll see. The door closed behind him, the sound final, like a book slamming shut. I stood there, the bag in my hand, and felt not pain, but relief, a lightness I hadn't known was possible. The house was quiet, but it felt alive, its walls exhaling with me. I set the bag on the table and opened it expecting coffee beans or a cheap gesture. Instead, I found a small, sealed envelope, its paper thick and yellowed, like the one I'd found in Daniel's $20,000 bribe. My heart skipped, and I felt that chill again, sharp and unyielding. I tore it open, my hands trembling, and found a single note in that same unfamiliar handwriting. The shadow moves with him. Stay vigilant. My breath caught, and I looked toward the door, half expecting to see Daniel standing there watching. But the room was empty. The house silent, save for the faint ticking of the wall clock. The note was another piece of the puzzle, another warning tied to the journal, the box, the key with wings symbol. Was Daniel the shadow George had warned me about? Or was it something else, something guiding him, manipulating him? I walked to the locked box, my fingers brushing the etched symbol. The key was still in the velvet pouch hidden in my dresser, but I didn't need it now. I needed time to think, to understand, to piece together the truth George had left for me. I sat back in my chair, the note in my hand, and let the quiet settle around me. The house felt different now, not oppressive, but protective, as if it were shielding me from whatever shadow Daniel carried. I thought about burning the note, about letting the flames consume the fear it stirred. But I didn't. I tucked it into the journal next to the other warnings and closed the cover. This wasn't about fear. It was about strength, about the woman I'd become. I'd faced Daniel not with anger, but with truth, and I'd walked away whole. I wasn't his mother anymore, not in the way he wanted. I was Geraldine Foster, a woman who'd given everything and found herself in the giving, who'd faced betrayal and emerged stronger. The evening deepened, the stars appearing outside, faint pinpricks in the velvet sky. I stood and walked to the window, the oak tree swaying gently, its branches whispering secrets I was close to understanding. The house was alive, its walls holding not just memories, but power, a legacy I was still uncovering. And as I stood there, the note, the journal, the box behind me, I felt a quiet certainty. Whatever shadow followed Daniel, whatever truth lay in the locked box, I was ready. I was awake, and I would not be silenced. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across the living room, a dance of light and memory that felt like a blessing. I sat at the kitchen table, the red leather journal open before me, its pages a tapestry of my past grief sacrifice and now awakening. The locked box from the cedar chest sat nearby, its key with wings symbol glinting faintly, as if it held a secret that was both mine and not mine. George's letter tucked inside, still whispered in my mind. Daniel is not what he seems. He's been guided by something or someone else. The key is yours now. Protect it. The cryptic note from Daniel's coffee bag. The shadow moves with him. Stay vigilant. Lay beside it a warning I hadn't yet deciphered, but felt in my bones. Today was the final step, the last act in reclaiming my life. I'd already faced Daniel, signed the trust with Marion, and pledged a legacy to Greenview in George's name. But there was one more task. One more piece to complete the puzzle of myself, a letter to Matthew, a testament to the woman I'd become, and a visit to the place where my choices would take root. I was no longer the mother who gave until she was empty. I was Geraldine Foster, a woman who'd found strength in the ashes of betrayal, who'd learned to live for herself. I stood my knees creaking softly and walked to the secretary desk, pulling out a sheet of thick cotton paper Marion had given me. The pen in my hand felt heavy, not with doubt, but with purpose. I sat and began to write the words flowing like a river I'd held back too long. Dear Matthew, when you read this, I'll be gone, but I hope you'll feel me still in the house, in the air, in the choices I have made. You were my spark, the one who reminded me that love doesn't ask for payment. I've left you the trust not to burden you, but to free you, to give you the chance to build a life that's yours. Money is time, Matthew, and time is choice. Choose well not for me, but for you. There's a box in the cedar chest locked with a key you'll find when the time is right. It holds truths I'm still uncovering about your grandfather, about this house, about the shadow that followed us. Be careful, but don't be afraid. You're stronger than you know, just as I was. Live for yourself, Matthew. That's what I've learned to do, and know that I loved you always. Your grandmother, Geraldine. I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote Matthew's name across the front. My hands were steady, my heart full. This wasn't just a letter, it was a promise, a bridge between the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. I placed it on the nightstand next to George's letter, and felt the house sigh with me, its walls warm with approval. The drive to First Fidelity Bank was quiet, the city waking slowly under a sky heavy with clouds. The locked box sat in my handbag, its weight a constant reminder of the mystery I hadn't yet solved. I'd brought it with me, not because I planned to open it, but because it felt right, like carrying a piece of George, of the house of the truth. Mr. Halbrook met me in his office. His tie as stiff as his smile still rattled from our last meeting when I'd revealed Daniel's loss of control. Mrs. Foster, he said, adjusting his glasses. Everything is in order. The trust documents have been filed, and the transfer to Matthew is complete. There's just one form left for your signature to confirm the charitable allocation to Greenview. I nodded, scanning the paper he slid across the desk. It was straightforward, a final affirmation that 200,000ers would go to the George Foster wing, a place where people like me, people who'd given everything, could find dignity, not abandonment. I signed with a flourish, my hand steady, and handed it back. Thank you, Mr. Halbrook, I said. This feels right. He smiled, a real smile this time, and I felt a flicker of pride. I wasn't just signing papers, I was rewriting my story, carving out a legacy that Daniel couldn't touch. As I stood to leave, I glanced at my handbag, and that chill returned sharp and sudden like a breath on my neck. The box seemed to hum its key with wing symbol catching the light, and for a moment I swore I heard a whisper, "Protect it." I froze, my heart pounding, but the room was empty, the air still. Mr. Halbrook didn't notice his focus on his computer, but I felt it, the house, the box, the key. They were all part of something larger, something I was meant to guard. I left the bank, the wind biting through my coat, and drove to Greenview, the box still in my handbag, its presence a quiet anchor. The center looked different today, less like a relic and more like a promise. Clara Hensley met me at the entrance, her clipboard replaced by a blueprint of the East Wing, Mrs. Foster. She said, her voice warm. "We've started planning. Would you like to see the progress?" I followed her through the center past residents, who nodded or smiled, their faces softer than before, as if they sensed change coming. The East Wing was still a skeleton of its future self, exposed beams, tarps over windows, but I could see it: bright rooms, a garden with benches, a library filled with books. Clara pointed out where the new lighting would go, where the walls would be painted a warm yellow, where the garden would bloom with roses, George's favorite. As we walked, I noticed a woman in a faded shawl, the same one I'd seen before sitting by a window. Her eyes were fixed on the parking lot, her hands folded in her lap, and for a moment I saw myself in her, a woman who'd given everything waiting for someone who'd never come. I stopped, my heart tightening, and approached her. "Hello," I said softly. I'm Geraldine." "What's your name?" She turned her eyes, cloudy but kind. "Eleanor," she said, her voice faint like a memory. "You're the one fixing this place, aren't you?" "I'm trying," I said, smiling. "It's for my husband, George, and for people like you." She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "It's been a long time since anyone cared." I squeezed her hand, my throat tight, and felt that chill again, but this time it was warm, like a touch of reassurance. I glanced at my handbag, the box inside, and wondered if George was here somehow watching. Or was it the house's spirit woven into my choices, guiding me to this moment I didn't know, but I felt it: a connection, a purpose, a strength I had carried all along. Clara led me back to her office where we finalized the plans. I left with a sense of completion, not just for the wing, but for myself. The drive home was quiet, the box still humming softly, its mystery a weight I was ready to carry. As I pulled into the driveway, the oak tree swayed in the wind, its branches whispering, and I felt the house welcome me back, its walls warm with memory. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the journal open before me, the locked box beside it. I'd brought out George's letter again, its words a lifeline. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." I read it slowly, tracing his handwriting, and felt him with me, not as a ghost, but as a truth. The key with wings symbol, the warnings, the shadow. They were still a mystery, but they no longer frightened me. They were part of my story, part of the legacy I was building, not just for Matthew, but for myself. I picked up the journal and flipped to a blank page, my pen hovering. I wanted to write something final, something that would mark this moment, this awakening. The words came slowly, deliberately. "I am Geraldine Foster. I gave everything, and I lost nothing. I faced betrayal and found strength. I am not invisible. I am awake, and I am enough." I closed the journal, my heart full, and stood to make tea. The kettle whistled, its sound a comfort, a reminder of the life I'd built. I poured the tea, the steam curling like a question mark, and sat back in my chair, the box and journal before me. The house was quiet, but it felt alive, its walls holding not just secrets, but power, a legacy I'd claimed as my own. I thought of Daniel, of the shadow that moved with him, and felt a flicker of pity, not for him, but for the boy he'd been, the one who'd run to me with scraped knees, who'd laughed at George's bad jokes. That boy was gone, lost to greed or something darker, something I'd yet to understand. But I wasn't his keeper anymore. I was my own. I stood and walked to the window, the stars bright outside the oak tree, a silhouette against the sky. The locked box sat on the table, its key hidden in the velvet pouch, waiting for the right moment. I didn't need to open it yet. I didn't need to know every truth to live my own. I was Geraldine Foster, A woman who'd survived, who'd built a legacy, who'd found peace in her own strength. And as the night wrapped around me, I knew I was home, not just in this house, but in myself,